Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. Imagine a world where you never lose your keys or wallet. Does that sound too good to be true? A system is coming soon that will make sure no one ever loses these vital items again. We carry our lives in our keys and wallet. Imagine a world where these two things will no longer be subject to loss or theft. That's not just a matter of convenience, but safety. But there's more. Imagine going into a store and selecting the things you want, then just taking them directly to your car without passing through a checkout. How about mobile banking that is completely secure, with no passwords to remember, and no way for hackers to steal your identity? Wouldn't it be great if online shopping were completely secure without passwords or credit card numbers? Imagine the convenience of walking straight onto your airline flight without long lines at the ticket counter or at the security checkpoint. Wouldn't it be great to get off the plane at your destination and walk directly onto the rental car lot? Then drive off in the car of your choice without even talking to an attendant. Imagine a world where your credit cards cannot be accessed by anyone but you, even if they know your mother's maiden name and that you called your first dog Rover. The worst thing about taxes, other than having to pay them, is the amount of time they take. But with the system, doing taxes will be a breeze. It will fill out your tax form for you, never forgetting anything, and instantly transmit it onto the cloud. As soon as you make a business purchase, it will log and categorize that transaction. It will record and categorize your mileage as you drive. It will make cars impossible to steal. In a medical emergency, paramedics will see your medical history while en route to your location. The hospital and the ambulance will begin to monitor your vital signs the moment they get the emergency call. And a human being won't even need to make the call. The system will call. All of the things I have just described will be possible because of a teeny microchip implanted in the hand. It will monitor people's bodies all the time. It will know when its host has been in an accident or had a heart attack or stroke. If grandmother falls and can't get up, she won't need to push a button. The system will sense her predicament and call for help. The technology will soon exist for the chip to include blood testing sensors that will compile data on a whole range of health issues. It will constantly monitor the blood for signs of cancer, heart disease, STD, and dozens of other diseases that can be detected by subtle changes in the blood. And that is how the Antichrist and false prophet will get 7 billion people to take the mark of the beast. They won't have to threaten most of them. The people will want the system. Why? Convenience. This society worships at the altar of convenience. The mark of the beast system will promise more convenience than the world has ever known before. It will sound like nirvana. Last week in Wisconsin, a firm implanted chips in its employees who would accept them. It didn't hurt much, just a slight sting as the teeny device was inserted under the skin of each employee's hand. 41 of the company's 85 workers chose to be chipped, and it was all about convenience. Instead of opening a locked door by slipping a key card through a reader, The employee will hold up his or her hand and the door will open. They will log onto computers without passwords. They'll just hold the chipped hand near the chip reader. They can even buy snacks in the company break room without pulling out cash or credit card. But the Wisconsin firm represents only a first effort, and its devices will soon seem rudimentary. The mark of the beast system will be sold not just on its convenience, but also with a promise of safety. Terrorism runs on money. The system will dry up that supply of money. The system will promise an almost complete end to terror. When the United Nations sanctions a nation, bank, or individual, it's a messy, inefficient process. But with all money under the system's tight control, sanctions will be instantaneous and complete. Today, with powerful and sophisticated computers costing only a few $100s, counterfeiting cash and credit cards gets easier all the time. Governments and businesses struggle to stay ahead of the criminals, but keep falling behind. Cash and physical credit and debit cards are dangerous, but that won't be a problem with the system because it won't use cash or physical cards. In fact, the system will require the end of cash. We like cash because it's untraceable, easy to hide, and almost everyone accepts it. But those are the very reasons governments do not like cash. We're closer to a cashless state than you might think. The world's monetary structure today is not based on gold or even boxes of paper bills in the vaults of banks. The zeros and ones of computer codes already serves as the world's real currency. Dr. Bhaskar Chakravarti is Senior Associate Dean of International Business and Finance at Tufts University. In June, he wrote in U.S. News and World Report, cash is being displaced in so many ways that it's hard to keep track. These innovations are encouraging cashlessness across communities worldwide. Even with that, he concluded, the future will be less cash rather than cashless. But that misses the point. If any cash remains at all, terrorists, criminals, and rogue states will still use it. Peter Sands of Harvard Kennedy School wrote last year, illegal money flows pose a massive challenge to all societies, rich and poor. How quickly could the world transition to a cashless economy? The fundamental technology exists right now. In the industrialized nations, the electronic infrastructure also exists. You would expect the third world to be far behind on this, but it isn't. Over the last decade, tens of billions of dollars have been spent to connect people, homes, and businesses to the internet. In Africa and elsewhere, this is mostly done using the cellular phone system. Most of the pipes have been laid and the system is almost ready to go. What will jumpstart it? It could be as close as one major terrorism event. You may be wondering if the system can really deliver on its promises. Will the implanted chips really be unhackable? Will all the added convenience really enhance people's lives? Probably not so much, but many people are ready for it. We have been conditioned to believe in the limitless potential of technology. A major terrorist event or an economic collapse would make the world desperate for some way to hold everything together, just as the Bible prophets predicted. In 488 BC, Plato compared the government of a city or nation to a ship. He called it the ship of state. Right now, the United States ship of state is leaking badly. Every U.S. president has battled leakers. Richard Nixon's whole Watergate affair started with the formation of a covert White House investigation unit called the White House Plumbers. What do plumbers do? They stop leaks. The recent Obama administration pursued leaks and leakers more aggressively than anyone since Nixon. But according to current Attorney General Jeff Sessions, that's about to change. President Trump and his team are facing an unprecedented level of leaking, and they're now in the early stages of an unprecedented fight against the leakers. One of the biggest leaks of the last few years was when a soldier, then known as Bradley Manning, began sending classified information to WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Now known as Chelsea, many on the far left view Manning as a modern-day hero, striking a blow for human decency. As officers took Manning from court during the trial, onlookers shouted, "We'll keep fighting for you," and "You're our hero." But Manning's disclosures were not the work of a principled person protesting an unjust war. Just the opposite. Among other dangerous things, Manning released 250,000 diplomatic cables. Conflicts between nations are inevitable, but few of them turn into war. And that's because of diplomacy. The U.S. State Department and similar diplomatic agencies around the world are parts of the government totally committed to avoiding war. By releasing those cables, Manning undermined our diplomacy. That made war more likely, not less. The same thing can be said of a recent leak from the Trump White House. In its August 3rd edition, the Washington Post published transcripts of a conversation between President Trump and the President of Mexico. It also printed transcripts of a call between Trump and the Prime Minister of Australia. Neither call presented the U.S. President in a flattering light, but that's the way it is with private conversations. President Lyndon Johnson would often go from threatening to arm twisting to whining to actually crying, all in an effort to get people to do what he wanted. We know these things from eyewitness accounts reported in history books, not from contemporaneous newspaper articles. In an attempt to simply embarrass the president, the leaker and Washington Post put the entire world at greater risk. When national leaders cannot speak to each other over the phone, confident that their words will not be leaked to the press, misunderstandings will multiply. The risk of a trade war goes up. The risk of a shooting war increases. It's true that diplomats have not always had telephones, but in the time before the instant communication made possible by phones, the two sides didn't have missiles that could fly halfway around the globe in half an hour. Some commentators have made this leak sound like no big deal. After all, no classified material was released. They're missing the real point. Trust was broken, not just between these three men, but between all heads of state the world over. Because their confidentiality has been breached, candid discussion among these leaders has become less likely. As a result, diplomacy itself was injured. That's a big deal, bigger even than released classified documents. Trust and diplomacy keep nations from firing weapons at one another. This is only one in a series of leaks that has plagued this administration. Many of them have included the illegal release of classified information. Attorney General Jeff Sessions called the number of leaks staggering and said that they undermine the ability of our government to protect this country. The Director of National Intelligence further warned,
"In the last several years, the U.S. intelligence community has experienced some of the worst compromises of classified information in our nation's history. Those disclosures have been disseminated to both the media and to our foreign adversaries. Let me be absolutely clear this morning. These disclosures have resulted in a major threat to our national security. They endanger the men and women of the intelligence community, the armed services, and those who serve overseas. These national security breaches do not just originate in the intelligence community. They come from a wide range of sources within the government, including the executive branch and including the Congress."
This is not the work of patriots, but traitors. The U.S. government is at war with itself, and that makes the world more dangerous for everyone. In Hebrew, the word Satan means adversary. Jesus called him the ruler of this world. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4 calls him the God of this age. In his role as God of this age, Satan conducts a relentless, well-planned strategy to blind men's minds to the truth about God and how to know him. If you were Satan, where would you launch your heaviest attacks? I would aim most of my fire at the Bible, those who preach and teach it, and at the church. With the Bible generally accepted as a revelation from God, mankind could not easily be blinded. With ministers preaching and teaching the Bible, the Christian would keep growing in his faith, witnessing to the world, and not be easily deceived. While churches were organized and functioning according to the New Testament pattern, they could not be swept away from their real purpose of building disciples and reaching out to the world with the good news about Christ. When the apostles realized they were nearing the end of their lives, they warned about the coming attacks on truth and the church. They warned that such attacks would accelerate in the days just before Christ's return. In Paul's last session with the elders of the church at Ephesus, he gave the following exhortation: "Be on guard for yourselves and for all the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. I know that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock, and from among your own selves men will arise speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after them. Therefore, be on the alert." Paul predicted that there would be ministers from within the church who would teach perverted things while posing as teachers of truth. The antidote to the coming apostasy is given in verse 32. "And now I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you the inheritance among all those who are sanctified." Paul exhorted the church leadership to place heavy reliance upon God and the word of his grace. When a minister ceases to teach and emphasize a personal faith walk with God upon the principle of grace instead of law, he has taken the first step down the road to apostasy. History is strewn with evidence of movements born in the fires of revival that after a few generations fell into error and eventual apostasy. Many of the great denominations of today bear little resemblance to the faith and fervor of their original founders. Christians have been bewildered at this continual trend away from God and have asked, why? In most cases, the trend began in a departure from the grace of God into legalism. Legalism, seeking to live for God by the principle of law, is the first and worst of the doctrine of demons. It is the dent in your armor at which Satan will chip away until he has a hole big enough to drive a truck through. I don't know another doctrinal distortion that has been more devastating to believers. The awful thing is that it can sidetrack a mature believer as well as a young one. In fact, this demonic doctrine seems to find especially fertile soil in the life of a growing believer who is intent upon pleasing God in his life. It was regarding teachers of legalism that Paul wrote, "But I am afraid lest as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, your mind should be led astray from the simplicity and purity of devotion to Christ. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workers, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ." And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Therefore, it is not surprising if his servants, literally ministers, also disguise themselves as servants or ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their deeds. According to this warning, Satan has his own corps of dedicated ministers who masquerade as ministers of righteousness. What could be more effective than a minister, sincere and moral, quoting the Bible, yet missing grace? Some who truly belong to God's family become tools of Satan by putting their flocks under the law. Satan wants to keep unbelievers away from grace. For those who have already come to Christ, he wants to erase grace from your thoughts and beliefs. He wants to reduce the gospel of Jesus to a dependence on the ability of human flesh to be good. On the cross, Jesus redeemed us. He satisfied the requirements of justice. He's the Savior. He does the saving. Will we now diminish his work on the cross by adding legalism? Add 1 to 0 and the 0 disappears. Add works to salvation and grace disappears. Romans chapter 11 verse 6 puts it like this: "But if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Otherwise, grace is no longer grace." Legalism will leave you beaten up and worn out. It's time to trust your salvation to the only one who can actually save you, Jesus. If you've never done that, you can do it right now. Pray with me. Lord, I don't understand everything, but I know I have broken your laws. Forgive me. I receive your grace right now. Lord Jesus, come into my life. Give me a new heart with new desires. Thank you for forgiving me as you promised. If you prayed that and meant it, you just changed your eternal destiny. Well, that's it for tonight, folks. God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.